Walter Breau didn't call his daughter. He didn't call his brother in Moncton. He didn't call anyone. For 11 days, he ate one meal a day at the Tim Hortons on Regent Street and slept in his pickup truck behind the Canadian Tire on the edge of Fredericton. On the 12th day, a woman knocked on his window. She wasn't who he expected, and what she said changed both of their lives in ways neither of them had planned for. Walter Joseph Breau was 53 years old. He had spent 22 years as a licensed electrician with Maritimes Industrial Services out of Fredericton, New Brunswick. He knew how to read blueprints in the dark, how to wire a commercial building from the ground up, how to train apprentices half his age without making them feel small. He had calloused hands and a methodical brain and a reputation for showing up, always showing up, regardless of whether or hour or how much his lower back was protesting. He earned $31.40 an hour when the contract ended, not because he did anything wrong, because the company lost a federal tender in September and laid off 14 people on a Friday afternoon via email. Walter read the email twice in the parking lot of a hardware store, sitting in his truck with the engine running, and then he drove home and didn't say a word about it for 3 days. He had a daughter. Claire was 26, living in Halifax, working as a lab technician and finishing her second year of a part-time biology degree. She called every Sunday evening. Walter always picked up on the first ring. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of going quiet when something was bothering her, and Walter had spent 26 years learning to read that quiet. His wife, Diane, had died 4 years earlier. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. Walter had used most of their savings during her illness. Extended leave from work, the drive to Moncton twice a week for treatments. The medication's insurance didn't cover. He had rebuilt slowly after. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to cover the mortgage on the house in Maplewood, enough to keep the lights on, enough to believe that the worst of it was behind him. Then the email arrived. He paid October's mortgage with what he had left in the checking account. He applied for employment insurance the same week. The processing delay was 6 weeks. 6 weeks with no income, no savings cushion, and a mortgage payment due again on the 1st of November. He called his brother Dennis in Moncton, who offered to lend him $800 and meant it, but Dennis had 3 kids and a leaking roof, and Walter knew that $800 meant something different to Dennis than it did to the man offering it. He said he was fine. He said the EI would come through soon. He said not to worry. He sold his riding lawnmower in the first week, his table saw in the second. He made 1 payment to the bank and asked for a deferral on the next. The bank's automated system told him to call back during business hours. He called back during business hours. He was put on hold for 40 minutes and then disconnected. On a Tuesday evening in late October, Walter locked the front door of the house in Maplewood for the last time, loaded his tools, a sleeping bag, a duffel bag with 4 days of clothes, and a photograph of Diane in a small silver frame into the bed of his 2014 Ford F-150. He drove to the Canadian Tire on Prospect Street and parked in the back corner of the lot, away from the streetlights but close enough to the road that he could see who was coming. He was not a man who asked for help. He was not a man who cried in front of other people. He was not a man who believed that circumstances like these were anyone else's problem to solve. He was a man who'd wired hospitals and schools and apartment complexes, who'd trained apprentices and passed his Red Seal exam on the first try and never once called in sick unless he actually couldn't stand up. He believed in earning what you had and not asking for what you hadn't earned. That belief, as it turned out, was the very thing making him invisible. The first night in the truck was almost manageable. He kept the engine running in 20-minute intervals for heat, conscious of the fuel gauge. He ate a chicken sandwich from the Tim Hortons drive-thru and drank black coffee from a thermos he'd brought from home. He sat in the driver's seat with the seat pushed back and his legs crossed at the ankle and told himself this was temporary. A few nights, the EI would come through. He'd find contract work. He called Claire on Sunday the way he always did. She asked how he was doing. He said fine, Just busy with job applications. She said she'd been thinking about coming home for Remembrance Day weekend. He said the house was being painted. Bad timing. She said okay, maybe Christmas then. He said definitely Christmas. The second night was colder. Fredericton in late October is not Yellowknife, but it is not gentle either. The cold came through the truck doors around midnight with the quiet persistence of something that knew it had all the time in the world. Walter had 2 wool sweaters and a winter jacket, and he wore all of them. He thought about Diane. Not in the sentimental way he used to in the first year after she died, the searching kind of grief that kept looking for her in the next room. He thought about what she would say if she could see him right now. He thought she would say something practical. She always led with practical. She would have said, "Walter, call Dennis." He didn't call Dennis. The 5th night, he moved the truck to a different lot, a church parking lot on Smythe Street, a United Church with a marquee sign out front that read, "All are welcome." He hoped that extended to a 53-year-old electrician with nowhere to sleep. He had developed a system by then. He washed up every morning in the Canadian Tire washroom when they opened at 8, changed into clean clothes from the duffel bag, drove to Tim Hortons, sat at the counter with a large coffee and his laptop, applied for jobs: commercial electrician, industrial maintenance, facilities manager, contractor. He applied for 12 positions in 11 days. He heard back from 2. One said they were looking for someone willing to relocate to Fort McMurray. The other said the position had already been filled. He ate 1 full meal a day, midday, whatever was cheapest and warmest. In the evenings he sat in the truck with his laptop until the battery died. Then he sat in the dark and made lists in his head. What he owed, what he had. The distance between the 2 numbers. He was good at math. That was the problem. He was very good at math, and the math had no good answer. On the 9th night, it rained. Not the soft kind of fall rain that sounds almost pleasant on a truck roof. The heavy, sideways kind that finds every gap and seal and works its way through anyway. The passenger window had a slow leak he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. Water came in along the corner of the frame in a thin, steady line. Walter put a dishcloth against it and held it there for a while, with his hand pressed flat against the cold glass, and then he moved the cloth to soak up what was already on the seat and decided to stop thinking about it. He was very tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes. The other kind, the kind that accumulates over days of being on guard, of waking at every noise in a parking lot, of performing normalcy at Tim Hortons every morning while managing a reality that would have stunned every person in that restaurant if they'd known about it. The man in the orange vest at the counter applying for jobs had slept in his truck the night before. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. He hadn't told Claire. He hadn't told Dennis. He hadn't told anyone. That, he would realize later, was the closest he'd come to the worst of it. Not the cold, not the truck, not the dwindling bank account. It was the silence, the weight of something no one knew you were carrying. On the 11th night, Walter did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He talked to Diane, out loud quietly, the way you talk to someone in an empty room when you're not entirely sure they can't hear you. He said, "I don't know what I'm doing, Di. I think I made some wrong turns. I think I waited too long to ask for something and now I don't know how to start." The truck was quiet. The rain had stopped. The church sign across the lot glowed faintly. He sat there for a long time. The 12th morning was a Wednesday. A woman named Sylvette Marchetti arrived at the United Church on Smythe Street at 7:15 in the morning to unlock the basement for the weekly community breakfast program. She was 48 years old, a former social worker, who now ran the church's outreach programming as a part-time coordinator. She had auburn hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of steady, unrattled manner that comes from 15 years of sitting across from people in the hardest moments of their lives. She noticed the truck on her way in. Not because anything about it was alarming, but because it had been in the same spot for 4 mornings running, and she had learned, over 15 years, that patterns in parking lots meant something. She did not knock immediately. She made coffee first. She put muffins in the warming oven. She signed the volunteer sheets and answered 2 emails, and then she put on her coat and walked back out to the parking lot. She knocked on the driver's side window, twice, gently. The way you knock when you're not certain you should be knocking at all. Walter flinched the way a person flinches when they've been sleeping lightly for 11 days, in a place where any noise means something. His hand went to the ignition out of reflex. He turned toward the window. A woman stood outside with her hands open at her sides and a thermos in one of them. She was not a security guard. She was not a bylaw officer. She was not holding a phone or a clipboard. She was holding a thermos, and she had stepped back 1 full step, and she was waiting. Walter cracked the window. "I'm not causing any trouble," he said immediately. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "I'll be out of here by 8. The woman nodded. She didn't argue with him. She didn't pull out a policy manual. She said, "How long have you been out here?" Walter looked at her. He looked at the thermos. He looked at the church sign behind her, still lit up against the early morning gray. "I'm fine," he said. "I didn't ask if you were fine." Her voice was even. "I asked how long." Walter looked at the steering wheel. His hands were on it, even though the engine wasn't running. Old habit. 11 nights, he said. Sylvette looked at him for a moment. Not with pity, not with the reflexive discomfort that most people showed when the distance between their life and someone else's collapsed unexpectedly. She looked at him the way someone looks at a problem they know how to approach. "There's coffee inside," she said. "And muffins. You don't have to talk to anyone. You don't have to explain anything. You can just come in and be warm for an hour." Walter looked at the church. He had not been warm, genuinely warm, since the first week of October. He got out of the truck. The basement of the United Church on Smythe Street was not impressive. Drop ceiling, fluorescent lights, folding tables, metal chairs, a serving table along one wall with a coffee urn and a warming tray. A bulletin board with sign-up sheets and printouts about food bank hours and housing resources. But it was warm in the specific, intentional way of a place that runs heat all morning because the people inside need it. 3 other people were at the tables when Walter came in. An older man in a plaid jacket who didn't look up. A young woman in her 20s with a stroller and a sleeping infant. A man about Walter's age, or older, sitting very straight and drinking coffee with both hands around the cup. Walter sat at the end of a table nearest the door. Sylvette brought him coffee without asking how he took it, then came back with milk and sugar on the side and didn't say anything about it. He drank half the cup before he spoke. "I was a licensed electrician," he said. "Red Seal, 22 years. Sylvette sat down across from him. She didn't have a notepad. She wasn't filing anything. She was just sitting there. "I know how to work," Walter said. "I'm not. This isn't." He stopped. He put the cup down. He picked it up again. "I don't know why I'm telling you this, because you've been carrying it alone for 11 nights, Sylvette said. Walter looked at her. "People do that," she said, "especially people who've always managed on their own. They wait until they can't wait anymore, and then they don't know how to start talking." He told her. "Not all of it, not the first morning, but in pieces, the way a dam lets water through before it stops holding altogether. The layoff, the EI delay, the mortgage, the savings already spent during Diane's illness." He said his wife's name once and then didn't say it again, but Sylvette caught it and didn't ask. When he was done, she sat with it for a moment. She didn't say it would be okay. She didn't tell him God had a plan. She didn't tell him things always worked out in the end. She said, "I want to make a phone call. Can I do that before you leave?" He said yes. The person Sylvette called was a woman named Rosaire Fontaine. Rosaire was 56 years old, the founder and executive director of Compass Point, New Brunswick, a transitional employment organization based in Fredericton that connected tradespeople who'd fallen through the gaps, illness, layoff, circumstance, with temporary housing, support, and employment reintegration. Rosaire herself had grown up in a 2-room house in Saint-Léonard, the third of 5 children of a mill worker who lost his job when Rosaire was 12 and didn't find steady work again until she was 17. She'd watched her father eat last at the table every night for 5 years and tell them he wasn't hungry. She watched her mother take in alterations and ironing and never once call it humiliation. She understood, in a specific and non-abstract way, what it meant to be competent and capable and still unable to hold the ground beneath you. She'd become a social worker, then a program director. Then, at 43, she'd started Compass Point with a federal grant and a borrowed office above a pharmacy on King Street. 13 years later, the organization had helped over 400 people in New Brunswick get back to stable housing and employment. She didn't talk about it much in public. She talked about the individuals. She remembered their names. She had her own particular losses. A son, Etienne, who had died 8 years ago, 22 years old, a second-year nursing student at UNB, who had stopped to help a woman whose car had stalled on the Trans-Canada in January and been struck by a transport truck that didn't see him in the dark. She had built Compass Point on the years before his death. She had kept building it afterward for reasons she didn't fully articulate to anyone and didn't try to. Etienne had wanted to be a nurse because, he told her once, eating cereal at her kitchen table with his feet up on the chair, he wanted to be the person who showed up on someone's worst day and made them feel like it was going to be survivable. She'd laughed at him for putting his feet on the chair. She had never forgotten the sentence. She drove to the church on Smythe Street 40 minutes after Sylvette called. Walter was still there when she arrived. He had eaten 2 muffins and was on his 3rd cup of coffee. And he had the look of a man who had not sat still in a warm room for 11 days and was now discovering that sitting still in a warm room was complicated, that the body didn't know quite how to process the absence of threat. Rosaire sat down across from him. She had gray hair cut practically short and reading glasses on a lanyard, and the kind of direct eye contact that isn't aggressive but doesn't look away. "Sylvette told me you're an electrician," she said. "Red Seal, 22 years, commercial and industrial." Walter nodded. "I have 3 contractors in my network who are actively looking for experienced ticket holders," she said. "One of them owes me a significant favor. I can make a call today. Not a guarantee, but a real conversation." Walter looked at her. Whatever he'd expected when he cracked the truck window that morning, it wasn't this. He'd expected to be directed to a website, maybe given a pamphlet. He'd expected the particular, frictionless sympathy of someone whose job required them to care from a careful distance. "Why?" he said. Rosaire looked at him. She didn't hesitate. "Because I know what it costs to ask for help when you've spent your whole life not needing it," she said. "And I know what happens when nobody's there to answer when you finally do." She paused. "My organization has a transitional housing unit on Brunswick Street. It's not a shelter. It's an apartment. 2 rooms, private bathroom, your own key. It's available tonight. You can stay there while we get the employment piece sorted. There's no timeline pressure, no conditions beyond respecting the space and being honest with us about where you are." Walter's jaw tightened. Not from resistance. From something harder to name, the specific difficulty of accepting something you need from someone who is still a stranger. "I'm not," he started. "You're not asking for charity," Rosaire said. "You're accepting a bridge. There's a difference. A bridge has a purpose. You get to the other side, and then you keep going under your own power. That's all this is." The apartment on Brunswick Street was on the 2nd floor of a building Compass Point had leased for 12 years. It was not beautiful. The flooring was laminate. The kitchen was small and the window looked out at a parking garage, but it was warm and the door had a lock, and there was a bed with a real mattress and 2 pillows, and the bathroom had hot water and a bar of soap on the sink ledge. Walter stood in the middle of it for a while after Rosaire left. He called Dennis. Dennis picked up on the 2nd ring. Walter told him the truth. Not all of it at once, the same way he'd told Sylvette, in pieces, with pauses between the pieces. Dennis was quiet for most of it. When Walter finished, Dennis was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, quietly, a word that isn't repeatable but conveys what he meant. "Walter," he said, "why didn't you call me?" Walter didn't have an answer that made sense in daylight. He said, "I thought I could figure it out. You were sleeping in your truck for 11 days, I know, in October. In Fredericton, I know, Dennis." A pause. Then Dennis said, "The way younger brothers say things to older brothers when the power dynamic has temporarily reversed. You're an idiot. I'm coming this weekend." He called Claire the next morning. He sat on the edge of the bed in the apartment on Brunswick Street with the phone in both hands and told her everything. He heard her go quiet in the way she went quiet when something was wrong, the way Diane used to go quiet, and he almost stopped talking twice, but he kept going because stopping had already cost him 11 nights. When he finished, Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Dad, I'm getting in the car. You don't have to." "I'm getting in the car," she said again, and her voice was steady in the specific way of a person who has decided something and means it. "I'll be there by 7. She was there by 6:50. She hugged him at the door of the apartment with both arms and held on for a long time, longer than she usually held on, and Walter stood there and let her, and it was the first time in 11 days that he'd let himself be held by anything at all. Rosaire called 2 contractors the following morning. The second one, a man named Brent Ola, who ran a mid-sized commercial electrical firm out of Oromocto, had known Rosaire for 6 years and taken 3 Compass Point referrals who all worked out well. He met Walter for coffee on a Thursday afternoon. He asked about the Maritimes industrial work, about the types of projects Walter had been on, about his comfort with industrial-scale systems. Walter answered every question directly and without performance. He was tired of performance. Brent offered him a 3-month contract, starting the following Monday, $34 an hour, possible extension to full-time, after the first quarter depending on a federal project tender. It was more per hour than Walter had made at the end of his last job. He said yes before Brent finished the sentence about the project tender. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on Saunders Street in the 2nd week of December. His own name on the lease. His tools in the closet. Diane's photograph on the windowsill in the living room in the silver frame he'd carried in the truck for 11 nights. He bought a small Christmas tree. Not a real one. He didn't have a stand, but one of the pre-lit ones from the Canadian Tire, which he plugged into the wall in the corner of the living room and looked at for a while on the first evening after he set it up. Claire came home for Christmas. She slept in the bedroom and Walter slept on the couch, and neither of them said anything about the fact that the apartment was a 1-bedroom. They ate turkey from the grocery store rotisserie section and watched a hockey game, and Claire fell asleep before the second period ended, and Walter sat in the quiet with the Christmas lights on and the city outside the window, and thought about all the math he'd done wrong and all the math that had eventually, improbably, come out right. He started volunteering at the Compass Point intake sessions in January. Rosaire hadn't asked him to. He'd asked her. He'd been in the office dropping off some paperwork about his transition file when he overheard a conversation in the hallway. A man speaking quietly to a staff member, saying he'd been a machinist for 18 years. He knew how to work, he just needed someone to tell him where to start. Walter recognized the voice, not the specific voice, the quality of it, the particular flatness of a person who has been capable his whole life and has just arrived at the moment where capability is not enough. He asked Rosaire if there was anything useful he could do. She gave him a chair at the intake table on Wednesday mornings. He was not a counselor. He was not a caseworker. He didn't have Rosaire's 15 years or Sylvette's training. What he had was 11 nights in a truck and a Red Seal ticket, and the specific credibility of a person who had lived exactly the thing the person across the table was currently living. He sat with a retired pipefitter from Oromocto, who hadn't slept indoors in 2 weeks. He sat with a woman who'd spent 20 years in food service and been let go, spent after a kitchen fire, closed the restaurant permanently, and left her without severance or reference. He sat with a 49-year-old carpenter who was embarrassed in a way that came out sideways as irritation and clipped sentences, and Walter recognized that too. He didn't tell them it would be okay. He didn't say things work out in the end. He said, "Here's what helped me. Here's who called me back. Here's how you fill out the EI reconsideration form when they decline you the first time. because they often decline you the first time. Here's what Rosaire can do, and here's what takes longer. He was specific because specific was what he'd needed. Abstractions don't keep you warm. Rosaire watched him across the room at those tables and didn't say much about it because she didn't need to. She knew what she was watching. She'd built the whole organization on this specific principle, that the people best equipped to help others through something were the people who had been through it themselves. Not because suffering ennobles. It doesn't, necessarily. But because remembered experience builds a kind of fluency that training cannot fully replicate. In March, Walter found out that the federal project tender had come through. Brent's firm was one of two awarded the contract, a commercial development in the medical district of Fredericton, 48 units of mixed-use space with a ground-floor health clinic. It would run 18 months at minimum. Brent offered Walter a full-time position at $36.50 an hour with benefits. Walter accepted. He called Dennis. Dennis said something unprintable that meant he was pleased. He called Claire, she said. Dad, in a way that held everything she'd been feeling since October. He drove past the Canadian Tire on Prospect Street on a Tuesday evening in late March. The back corner of the lot where he'd parked for 11 nights. He slowed down without quite meaning to, looked at that corner of the lot the way you look at a place that has stopped being itself and become something else, something annotated. He didn't stop. He kept driving. One evening in April, Rosaire was in her office on King Street after everyone else had left. She sat at her desk with a cup of tea going cold beside her and looked at the photograph she kept in the top drawer. Etienne, 21 years old, at his convocation from the nursing program's first year, in a blue shirt with his hair still damp. He was laughing at something off to the left of the frame. He was always laughing at something. She thought about the Thursday she'd driven to the church on Smythe Street and sat down across from a man who hadn't asked for help in 11 days and still wasn't sure he deserved it. She thought about the pipe fitter from Oromocto, who was now working at a fabrication shop in Lincoln and had sent her a card at Christmas that said only, "Thank you for the bridge, it was enough." She thought about the chain of it. Sylvette had noticed the truck. She had called Rosaire. Rosaire had called Brent. Walter now sat at the intake table on Wednesday mornings. Etienne had wanted to be the person who showed up on someone's worst day and made it survivable. He hadn't stopped, she thought. He'd just redistributed. She put the photograph back in the drawer. She finished her cold tea. She locked up the office and walked out into an April evening in Fredericton, the air still carrying that particular early spring quality of the cold that had been and the warmth that was deciding. In November, almost exactly 1 year after Walter had loaded his truck and driven away from the house in Maplewood, he was driving to a job site on the south side of the city when he passed the United Church on Smythe Street. It was a Wednesday morning, early, the marquee sign still lit. All are welcome. He slowed down at the light. In the church parking lot, a car sat alone. An older model Subaru, windows fogged from the inside, the particular condensation that only forms when people have been breathing in a closed space for a long time. He recognized the fog the way you recognize a place you've been. From the inside, he didn't have much time. He had a 7 o'clock start time on the medical district site. He had a crew waiting. He pulled into the lot. He sat for a moment with the engine running, looking at the Subaru, the fog on the windows, the stillness of it. He turned off the engine. He got out. His boots were steady on the asphalt. He walked to the driver's side window. He could see the shape of a person in the seat, upright the way you sit when you haven't truly slept, the body in a posture of permanent alertness that doesn't know how to stop. Walter raised his hand. He knocked, twice. Gently, the way Sylvette had knocked. The figure flinched, turned toward the window. A woman, perhaps 50, in work clothes, dark eyes, tired and watchful and very much awake. She reached reflexively for the gear shift. Walter stepped back. He raised both hands, open, visible, waiting. She cracked the window half an inch. "I'm not causing trouble," she said immediately. "I'll be gone before the church opens." Walter looked at her. He looked at the Tim Hortons cup in her cup holder, He looked at the duffel bag visible in the back seat. "How long?" he asked. Silence. The car's engine ticked once in the cold. Somewhere across the street, a city's bus went past. 7 nights, she said. Walter nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had Rosaire's card. He always had Rosaire's card. He'd started carrying it in September when he joined the intake table, because you never knew when you'd need it, and Sylvette had taught him, by example, that preparation was its own kind of kindness. He held it at the edge of the open window. "There's a woman named Rosaire Fontaine," he said. "She runs an organization called Compass Point. They have a housing unit available right now. Your own key, private bathroom, no conditions. And she has contractors who are hiring if you have a trade, or connections to training if you don't." He paused. "She's good. She showed up for me when I was where you are." 7 nights. The woman looked at the card, then at him. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Walter thought about Sylvette crossing the parking lot with a thermos. He thought about Rosaire sitting down without a notepad. He thought about 11 nights and a cracked window and the specific mercy of someone asking if you're fine. "Because somebody knocked on my window," he said. "And I think that's the whole answer." She took the card. Her hand was cold. He felt the cold in it when their fingers almost touched, and he thought about all the buildings he'd wired, all the systems he'd built that put heat into walls so that people on the other side of those walls could be warm, and how none of that had kept him warm in October, and how this, a card and a name and 2 minutes in a parking lot, somehow had. He walked back to his truck. He sat for a moment. Then he started the engine and drove toward the medical district and the job that was waiting, and the crew that needed him there, and the building that was going to house a clinic where people could walk in off the street and be seen by someone who had time to look. On Smythe Street, the church sign still glowed against the morning. "All are welcome."